Hey guys, welcome back to GuitarAnimal.com. This is Trent, and today we're going to go over the third part in my series on theory. This video basically requires that you have seen the first two parts. So if you have not seen the first two parts in the theory yet, go back and view those before going through this video. Okay, make sure that you notice the loop points at the bottom of the page here. You can use the loop points to stop and go over any part of this video as many times as you need to keep up. There's a lot of information here today, and I just want to make sure that you are with me on this. Also at the bottom of the page there is a sheet that you can print. It's a major scales worksheet, and you can actually, I recommend you print that. Go ahead and follow along and write down on your page the exact same thing that I'm doing so you can get it. Again, we can go over this as many times as you need to with the loop points, and make sure you check that out. Thanks for tuning in to GuitarAnimal.com, and we're going to get started. Today I'm going to show you how to write out major scales with sharps included in them. All right, it's a two-step process. We're going to choose the note names in our major scale, and then we're going to go back, and in this particular sheet we're going to be applying sharps to create major scales all the way from C all the way down to the C sharp major scale. Not only are these scales that we would play, these are also the basis for all the chords that we'll be making in the future, as well as all the major keys. So this is pretty important information. Again, remember the loop points at the bottom of the page. You can stop and go back over any part of this you need to as many times as you need to until you have it down. All right, so first step we're going to do is we need to write out the notes in the major scale. One of each of the 7 different natural notes is in the major scale, so it would be an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, an F, and a G, and they will be in alphabetical order. So whatever note I start on, I will end on the exact same note, 1 octave higher, and I will be writing them out in alphabetical order. So if I'm going to do the C major scale, for example here, we start with C, and we'll just write D, E, F, G, and we start over at A, a B, and a C. Now, once we have done that, step 1 is complete. We've chosen our note names. Step 2 will be to check the distances between the note names we've chosen, comparing them to our pattern for the major scale, which is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So our major scale pattern is whole step between first and second notes, whole step between the second and third, half step will be between 3 and 4, a whole step between the 4 and the 5, between the 5 and the 6, between the 6 and the 7, and another half step between the 7 and the 8. All right, over here we're going to be keeping track of how many sharps we had to add to our scale to create the major scale, depending on what note we start on. So with C, you will notice that between C and D, first and second notes, there is a whole step, and that's what we want between 1 and 2. D to E is a whole step, and 2 to 3 is a whole step, so it's matching. E to F is a natural half step, and it falls right between 3 and 4, which is right where we need a half step, so that's perfect as well. F to G is a whole step between 4 and 5, which is what we want. G to A is a whole step between 5 and 6, that's what we want there. A to B is a whole step between 6 and 7, and then our next natural half step, which is B to C, is falling between 7 and 8. So the C major scale is all naturals. We did not have to use any sharps to make it match our pattern of whole and half steps. Again, being whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. It's the only major scale that does not have any sharps or flats, and it's C major. So over here in our sharps category, we'll just put a big 0. Did not require any sharps or any flats. Again, that's the only one that's going to be that way. Let's do G, two-step process. Starting with G, just go through the alphabet of our notes. A, B, C, D, E, F, ending on G, 1 octave higher. Now in this group of notes, we have a whole step between G and A, 1 and 2, a whole step between A and B, between 2 and 3, half step at B and C, right at 3 and 4, that's fine, that's exactly what we want. C to D is a whole step at 4 and 5, matches. D to E is a whole step between 5 and 6, that matches our pattern. E to F is a half step, but between 6 and 7, I want a whole step. So we have to correct for this right here. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to move one of these notes to create a whole step in this position. Now, D to E has already been checked, and that was a whole step between 5 and 6. So we don't want to change the E, we're going to move the F. And the way we're going to move it is we're going to put a sharp next to it, which actually raises this note by 1, it'll be 1 fret on your guitar, or a half step. So E to F sharp creates that a whole step, which is what we want between 6 and 7. F sharp to G is a half step, because we have moved the F closer to the G, we moved it away from the E. with the sharp, but between 7 and 8, we want a half step. So F sharp to G is a half step right where we need it, and then we're back to our G note, and so this is the G major scale. It requires the use of one sharp to match this pattern of whole and half steps. So over here, when we're counting sharps, we'll put one sharp. All right, again, don't forget the loop points. You can stop the video here, go back over the C and the G as many times as you need to see what we're doing. Basically, our process is no matter what note we start on, we want to match this pattern of whole and half steps, and that's why we're using sharps to do so in this sheet. Starting with D, we just go E, then an F, G, then back to A, B, C, and D. We're going to move a little bit quicker here. D to E is a whole step, it's what we want. E to F is a half step. I want a whole step between 2 and 3, so I'm going to sharp the F, just as we did before. F sharp to G is a half step, right between 3 and 4, that's what I want. G to A is a whole step, that's good. A to B is a whole step, that's what we want there. B to C is a half step. I want a whole step between 6 and 7, so I'm going to sharp the C, and then C sharp to D is a half step right where I need it between 7 and 8. So the key of, or the D major scale requires 2 sharps. And we're going to move on, starting with A. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A. A to B is a whole step, right what I want. B to C is a half step. I want a whole step between 2 and 3. We sharp the C. C sharp to D is a half step between 3 and 4. That's exactly what we need there. D to E is a whole step. It works. E to F is a half step. I want a whole step. Sharp the F. F sharp to G is a half step. I want a whole step. Sharp the G. G sharp to A is a half step, and that's what I want between 7 and 8. So 3 sharps for the A major scale. What's going on here is as I'm starting with different note names, my natural half steps B and C and E and F are falling in different positions. In this particular group of scales, I'm using sharps to slide those half steps over to position 3 and 4 and position 7 and 8. So as we go down this page, we're going to continually add more sharps. Starting with E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and E. E to F is a half step. I want a whole step. Sharp the F. F sharp to G is a half step. I want a whole step there. Sharp the G. G sharp to A is a half step right where I need it. A to B is a whole step. That's good. B to C is a half step. I want a whole step. Sharp to C. C sharp to D is a half step. Again, I want a whole step. D sharp. D sharp to E is a half step, and between 7 and 8, I want a half step. So for the E major scale, we use 4 sharps. Keep track of that over here. Moving down to B. Starting with B, we just go C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. It's a C here. B to C is a half step. I want a whole step. C sharp. C sharp to D is a half step, but I want a whole step between 2 and 3, so we're going to use D sharp. D sharp to E is a half step between 3 and 4. That's what I want. E to F is a half step. I want a whole step. F sharp. F sharp to G is a half step. I want a whole step. G sharp. G sharp to A is a half step. I want a whole step between 6 and 7. So A sharp. And A sharp to B is a half step between 7 and 8, which is what I want. So the B major scale requires 5 sharps. All right, starting with F sharp is still an F of some sort, so we'll start with F. We're just going to go G, A, B, C, D, E, and we get down here, put the sharp back in on the F, F sharp. If you don't do that, probably when you get to the end of your scale after adding so many sharps, you might forget and it'll give you a problem. So make sure you start and end on the exact same note. F sharp to G is a half step. I want a whole step here, so G sharp. G sharp to A is a half step. I want a whole step. A sharp. A sharp to B is a half step between 3 and 4. It's right where I want a half step. B to C is a half step. I want a whole step between 4 and 5. So C sharp. C sharp to D is a half step. I want a whole step there. So D sharp. D sharp to E is a half step. I want a whole step. E sharp. Now, at the beginning, I stated that we need one of each of the 7 different natural notes in these scales. So it is correct to call this E sharp, even though it sounds just like F. It would be incorrect to call this F, because if you did call it F, you would have two different F notes. You'd have an F natural and an F sharp, but you'd have no E. So that would be confusing to work with. So it's E sharp for the 7th scale degree here in the key of F sharp. And that's going to give us a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sharps, not 7, because we will not count the F sharp twice. So 6 sharps for the key or the scale F sharp. I keep using the word key. These major scales will be the basis for our major keys, but for right now we're just using them as scales. So it's the F sharp major scale with 6 sharps. Now let's talk a little bit about C sharp before we do it. All of these scales, the goal was to keep them exactly in the same spacing. So every one of these scales will have whole steps in all scale degree positions except for 3 and 4, which will be a half step, and 7 and 8. We started with C, and C natural was all natural notes, no sharps at all. So if I sharp the first note, C to C sharp, I've raised this by a half step. To keep the same spacing, all of the notes would have to be raised a half step. And that's what we're going to have here. C sharp will be all sharps. I've seen some people talk on the internet about there not being a C sharp major scale. There is. We usually don't see it because D flat would be an easier one to deal with, less accidentals to deal with. But it does exist, so we're going to go through it here. So starting with C sharp, I'll just write down D, then E, F, G, A, B, C, no D, just C sharp. Let's just end with C sharp there. Getting excited. All right, C sharp to D is a half step, so we'll make this D sharp. D sharp to E is a half step, so it's E sharp. E sharp to F, they sound exactly the same. So we have to go F sharp, which gives us our half step at 3 and 4. F sharp to G is a half step, so let's make this G sharp. G sharp to A is a half step, so we'll make it A sharp. A sharp to B is a half step, so we'll make this B sharp. Again, B sharp, not C. Even though B sharp sounds exactly like C, we need to have a B represented here, so we're going to call it B sharp. And then B sharp to C sharp. So when you're counting sharps for the C sharp major scale, there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sharps, not 8, because we do not count the C sharp twice. So 7 sharps for the C sharp major scale. These are all the major scales which we either require the use of sharps or all natural notes for the C. Again, I went through that rather quickly, but you do have the loop points that you can set below, go over each one of these. I would recommend that you go over the C, the G, and the D a few times until you understand what's going on there. Then maybe do the A and the E, and just work your way through it until you finally get to the bottom. I did not figure that you would just go through this in 10 minutes and have it down. This will take some practice. Also, make sure you print out the sheet for the major scales worksheet at the bottom of this page so you can actually work this a few times on your own. Use pencil, you can erase your work and do it over and over again. We do want to keep track of the number of sharps because this will refer to key signature down the road. It's something that will tell us what group of chords and what key we're playing in when you're looking at pieces of music. So we do keep track of this. That's why I have this over here, number of sharps. To recap again, our major scale pattern is whole step, half, whole step, whole step, whole step, half. One of each of the 7 different natural notes does have to be represented in the scale. We write out our note names first and then go back and check our distances and our spacing. Make this a little bit easier, 2-step process instead of 1. And this particular order of notes is the way they were printed out on the worksheet and the way that we want to learn them. It starts with no sharps at all and ends with all sharps. So you can keep them in this order: C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, and C sharp. Again, major scales. Look for part 4. I'll be going over major scales which contain flats in the next video. And I hope that you've enjoyed this. And again, just set your loop points. Go over it as many times as you need to. Thanks for tuning in.